My name is Lalita. I am the program lead for the Hub 71 accelerator program that we do here in Abu Dhabi. This week we are going to be focusing on storytelling and narrative. This is a series that we do with the experts that we bring in for the accelerator program to expose them to our community and ecosystem here in Abu Dhabi. So we're very excited to have with us Ramzi, who is one of our program partners who supports our startups to soft land into the UAE through Clara, and our expert of the week, Laurie, who I'm sure will introduce herself shortly. She has come in to help all of our startups in the cohort with their narrative and storytelling, and today it's going to be focusing on how all of you can leverage the frameworks and expertise that she's brought in. So without further ado, not to put you on the spot, Laurie, I'm going to hand the mic over to her and Ramzi to kick us off, and I hope all of you enjoy the session today. Can we please give a warm Abu Dhabi welcome to our panel today?
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm Laurie Felker Jones, and I'm happy to be with you, Ramzi.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Hi, everybody. My name is Ramzi Ismail, and this is my third time in the UAE in the last 10 years. And there's a reason why we keep coming back here for the people like yourselves. So I am today's moderator. The key expert today is Laurie Felker Jones. We will discuss points on communication, storytelling for your startups, why it's important, and why your technology does not mean anything to the customers and investors. The goal here is to give you a bit of actionable tips, some anecdotes from our own stories, and some data points on why you should be focusing on brand and narrative development, and why this is also a critical part of your building from 0 to 1 and not for a later stage of the product. For now, I'll let Laurie kick off her story and why she's here and the way she got to this point. I'll introduce myself, and we'll go across various topics of storytelling, community building, and narrative development for communities, for companies, and for yourselves as founders. Laurie?
Sure. So I'll just jump into my story, and I remember it vividly. It was August 13th, 2016, and I came back to work with 2 kids under 2 at home and 34 candidates on my roster working for the largest political fund in Texas, the United States. And the only way I was able to win at work and at home is because I had amazing childcare partners. And finding them was a total nightmare, and it led me to becoming a founder myself and building the Booking.com of daycares and preschools in America. Now, previously, my experience had been working in politics, and I'd help elect more than 40 women to office in Texas, which is 0 to 1. It's market analysis, it's fundraising, it's scaling up very quickly, and it's product market fit on election day, except for we have to have all of our customers convert on this very specific day. My experience in politics serves me well as a founder, and now on the investor side, working with portfolios of founders and accelerators across the world, including, that's why I'm here today, in order to tell my story and win campaigns and propel ventures to market. And I've had to produce more than $1 million worth of earned media. So how do we get the media on our side to shape markets and help raise and advise over $40 million for over 100 different ventures and campaigns?
Hey everybody, my name is Ramzi Ismail. I am a Libyan-American expat, first generation eldest son. So I am the golden child and the black sheep of my family. The goal here is to understand how we got here and how we got connected. I first came to the Middle East through Abu Dhabi, actually. I was an entrepreneur out of Richmond, Virginia, where I went to school. My background was originally in investment banking and corporate finance, and realized that I loved the idea of building and being around builders, whether it be on the design side or the technology side. And I found my way through Flat 6 Labs, which is an accelerator out of Egypt that launched in Abu Dhabi. Formerly, the Hub 71 of Abu Dhabi was a group called 2454 that brought startups to the region around media and tech. I then joined a company called Techstars, which you all are familiar with here. I spent the last 6 years with them in New York, Berlin, and Dubai, launching programs, investing in founders, and supporting communities like Abu Dhabi and the UAE. I'm currently now the product lead for Clara. Some of you may have used us to onboard into the Hub 71 program. Any feedback and support, I'll take it directly. The company is still growing, and we, like you, are founders who are iterating and developing the company. Today's conversation is going to revolve around what it takes to build a brand, why narratives are important, and also lead with the stories from Laurie and myself's career investing in companies and communities over the last 10 years.
And Ramzi and I know each other from Baltimore, working in a Techstars program where it was a Techstars Equitech program. So I specialize, probably not any surprise for my background in politics into tech. I specialize in companies that are building for both profits and purpose. So how do you balance both of these things? And how do you tell a story to stakeholders that are interested in a return on impact, as well as stakeholders who are interested in a return on investment? So both of those things at the same time. So let's just make startups a little bit more complicated by trying to do one more thing, and that's what I love to do, is how do we get people involved in our movements and our businesses and market-based solutions to make a better future. And that is how we met, and now we're Baltimore to UAE.
And today's session is really about why you should be focusing on company narratives, right? A company narrative, your startup's narrative, helps you understand, and the community and customers and investors and employers and employees understand why you exist and what the future will look like with your company and your product in the market, right? It acts as a northern light to continuously guide your actions, your behaviors, and your policies around where you want to be in the future. A company narrative also humanizes a brand that may you think is unnecessary, but really is part of how consumers are adopting products and buying services at the moment. You'll see later on as we continue to develop the conversation that brand development and narrative development is critical as product development. And if you over-index on one or the other, it could be fatal to your company. So the goal here is to highlight why that's important, share more stories. We'll have questions from the community in the last 20 minutes of the conversation, so save those for a bit. If they're urgent, raise your hand and we'll try to take them, but if they can wait, let's wait till the end of the conversation. And so we'll dig into what Equitech means and what it means to be building companies with a strong narrative from Laurie's experience in politics and company building. So we can kind of go from there, and I'll meander with some questions and anecdotes from there.
Yeah, so the Equitech brand and vision based out of Baltimore is a very place-based economic development initiative where Baltimore, if you're not familiar, has an incredible amount of challenges as a city in terms of crime, education, housing, poverty, and they have an incredible amount of people that see a different future for Baltimore. So they've come together, they raised $17 million in order to look through a thesis of building economic development through scalable businesses that considered equity at the heart of what they do. So these are mission-driven companies or companies that are built by founders who are historically excluded, so women, people of color. And I think it's in some ways very analogous to what brings us here today, because it's another community like Hub 71 that says we are not complacent with the status quo. We are seeing opportunity for a region, and we see scalable tech companies as a way to realize that vision. And so very similar to what brings us here is we're not sitting back, we're shaping the future of what can be. And I think that's what drives from it's a very meta conversation. The story of Hub 71, of Equitech, of my story, of your story, of what's important to us and what we see for the future, and can you see it with us, and do you want to join us?
Sure, and I think founders who are building from 0 to 1 have to understand that storytelling is critical to forming a new future and creating a new reality that you hope to envision within your companies 10, 15 years from now, right? They've raised tens of millions of dollars and they're serving thousands of customers. That reality starts with the story that you tell yourself, you tell your team, you tell your investors, and you tell the community around you. And we'll go through a few of the different tips around that, including some of the 5 C's and the frameworks that are used to tell storytelling, but the goal here also is to be able to take this information and internalize it to your own company building and your own brand development at the moment. Lots of times founders, especially those who are technical and building deep tech and technology-based companies, tend to underestimate the value of brand development and storytelling, but really it should be one of the first things that you develop. A true company narrative starts with deep intuition, creativity, and connection to the problem, right? This takes data, this takes user pain points and understanding, and it takes the ability to synthesize this in a way that's interesting, compelling, and unique. And this is the same thing for candidates who are running for politics. Same thing for communities that are attracting founders to their countries. And the same for companies who want to attract investors and future brands and future employees as well.
When I said I worked in politics, how many of you had sort of like this kind of reaction? Like, how many people have that ever with politics? I have it with politics, and mainly it's because the stories are what I say, selling tickets to the Titanic. We say, it's terrible, 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 join us. And I'm like, no, I don't want to buy a ticket to the Titanic. I don't even want to buy a ticket to the lifeboat. I want to buy a ticket to the future, where I want to go. And I hope each of us have met someone in public service who has actually painted a picture for what is possible, and I want to join that person. And it's no different from when we're building innovations, we're trying to get people to join our team. What's in it for me? What's in it for them? Is what I'm always thinking about. So when you think about investors, when I think about customers and users, it's always thinking about what's over there. And when we open up for Q&A, I'd love to hear from a little bit about what brought you to the storytelling and what you're looking for. I imagine it's because you want help telling your stories and your narratives, and really getting in the mind of each of your audience members and their unique propositions. One example I use all the time that I think it's an example of what is done poorly, but also what's done well, is that sometimes as technical founders, we're like obsessed with our solution and we forget about the why. What's in it for the person on the other side? So I always joke that it's like if Coca-Cola sold their beverage, not by how refreshing it is, but the fact that it's carbonated corn syrup. Like, they're not going around saying, it's carbonated corn syrup, do you want to buy it? Or we're not showing what's inside an iPhone and all of the, technical parts of it. We're showing someone who, like, people are using it to take selfies or share pictures with their family or connect with each other. That's how we're using the product and what the success criteria is for the person on the other side of it. If we're selling in a B2B, we have many different stakeholders along that chain who are looking for different things, and we have to solve for each one of those buyers inside of an organization. And I said this morning in our session, it's like if you get an old school key made and you've got many tumblers in a lock. And sometimes, I don't know, it's happened to me where I get my key copied, I go put it in the door, it doesn't work. It almost works, but it doesn't work. But then I take it back to the workshop or the locksmith and they shave off like a millimeter, it seems like, on that key, and all of a sudden it turns all the tumblers in a lock. So that's what we want to do when we're crafting our stories and our messages and our sales pitches, is to actually craft it towards, we're painting a vision and we're also painting the path, and we have a clear call to action so that people are with us, or we're where they are actually, and they can go with us on this journey. They know how to go with us on this journey, and there's a call to action. I'm going to tell one more analogy, is that I always also like to think about, I'm now based in London, so I had a 7-hour flight to get here. Now, you all could have said, hey, do you want to get a 7-hour flight and, prepare a presentation and come talk to people? Or they could say, we have an incredible opportunity. We have an incredible ecosystem. You love talking to founders. Will you come with us? And I love adventure. I love being with founders. I love learning new ecosystems. And that was what's in it for me. So sometimes we sell Hawaii or the Maldives or Abu Dhabi by being like, do you want to get on a plane? Do you want to go through security? Do you want to sit on a tiny seat next to strangers? Like, we sell what's in it rather than our success criteria of what's in it for other people. So I always think, like, what's the Hawaii? What's the Maldives? What's the success criteria that's in it for the other person?
No, it makes complete sense. And I think typical storytelling can fall around 4 different narratives and arcs that you may have familiarized yourself or seen in other examples, whether it be in movies, advertisings, or actual editorials. One is the hero's quest, right? Somebody overcoming an obstacle or, dedicated to solving a problem. One is the transformation of an industry, of a supply chain, of a country at times. Others have the story of overcoming a monster, an incumbent, right? Trying to tackle the big, bad corporate that's solving something with unethical policies and practices. And lastly is the ability to join on a quest, right? This change of a company that you all here are built on. And a lot of these are driven through the idea of the 5 C's when it comes to building a story, right? Which is character, conflict, context, consequence, and the resolution. right? And kind of following this framework allows you to view your company and your brand in a way that resonates with the various stakeholders. We're talking here mostly about trying to support and build customers and employees, but there's also a pivot to this when it comes to investors, right? Trying to sell a big vision to investors that is not contextualized by data can leave you lost in a nuance and not really convincing. But being too data-driven with customers gets you lost also in the nuance and doesn't allow them to see the big vision of what it means to have your company or support your company. A lot of times now customers are looking for purpose, mission, and values in companies before they purchase them. I mean, Gen Z is a clear example of this, and I'm not Gen Z by any means, but I too now look at companies' about page. I look at their Instagram to see what they're posting about. I see the founders and see what they're tweeting about before I make a purchase. Because at some point, the technology, the service, or the product is comparable to another product, but do I believe in this company? Do I believe in this brand? And it's these small details that help you stand out as a founder. Having very limited resources, having limited capital and limited team, a brand humanizes you and it creates a ledge for you to stand on. You know, you can always get the argument about what if Google does this, or what if X does this, or what if Tesla does this in your company. But the idea is that you're going to evangelize the community around you is what helps you stand out in the early days and build the opportunity and the potential to compete in these bigger markets, which we're all trying to do here. Any examples from your side about seeing these hero squads
I was just
for transformation?
thinking about the narrative that I see, like for storytelling for startups, because we're in this. Well, I think you can apply this. We'll see. That oftentimes in the startup pitch, it's we're going to the moon, so we have a big enough market to make an investor's money back, but we're not completely crazy. This is how we're starting in this very stage-gated way, this very measured, logical way that we're going to go after this market, that market, that market, and we're validating things along the way. So I think it's just really analogous to what you were saying, or underpins what you're saying, where we have to tell the vision and have the data points to back it up, because we have to be credible, and establishing our credibility is paramount to the next thing that comes out of our mouth, and have people trust us. And that's true whether you are building a startup, whether you are inviting someone to dinner, like whatever you're selling, we're selling all the time, every day, to get people on our side or to get people to join us in what we're interested in doing.
No, I think you've already actually succeeded in part of that by being in the Hub 71 program. Teams like Hayat and Divya and Shama and Lalita look for part of the story that connects your technology to the founders, to the region as well, right? A lot of companies have very fascinating companies and technology, but if it's not relevant to the region, to the impact, to the community here, there's no reason to invest in you and come to the UAE. There's other places for you to build. But your ability to connect that story to the region and then back up to the market is kind of really one of the clear points that brought you here.
Why are you here? You're an educator. Oh, you're telling stories all the time. Yeah. I mean, I think that for me as a young person, and still to this day, because I'm not a young person anymore, young at heart forever, lifelong learner, is that I'm a very hands-on kinesthetic learner. So I need to be able to put this in context and learn the stories of why this matters. And I think that's a really important point, particularly for anybody who's a technical founder, is like, how does this relate to my daily life? I want to know that my cell phone works, or if my medical devices work, or even if the software I'm using is work. At the same time, how does this relate back to how I'm going to use it in my everyday life? I'm just curious, what is another group that's here? Why are you in the audience today?
I just want to start right. My team, part of it in Netherlands, and I'm here, and we have another part in Dubai. And because education have lots of stories to tell, why we want to do that. So I just want to know more about how to start right on telling the story, because when it comes to education and the impact of the platform would be, the outcome would be having better teaching in school and have better education process. So what would be the best way to tell this story from the start? Thank you.
Yeah, so I had the great pleasure a few years ago of working with a femtech startup, and they were serial founders. And they had a product for a very intimate issue that women deal with. And it doesn't matter what it is, but they had a lot of success in their previous startup selling B2B, or like they were already in the shelves of major retailers in the United States. So in their next startup, they kind of skipped over a process that a lot of other CPG companies have, where generally you go direct to consumer, D2C, and when you have a big enough base, the larger companies say, oh, you're onto something, we'll put you on the shelves. Well, they skipped over that. So they actually called me up and they said, we wanted to go to this big festival and we want to know what kinds of swag. Should we get t-shirts? Should we get fanny packs? Bum bags? Should we get chapsticks? What should we do with our brand on it? And I said, you have a very intimate product. Like, no one wants that on their swag. And they're like, well, how do you know? And I was like, I have a hunch. And also, like, what do you know about your customers? They're like, we don't know very much because they skipped this process. I said, well, let's go ask them. Because what they were getting sales numbers from person comes into store, sale comes out. They didn't know anything about their customers. So guess who's the best person to answer what matters to the customers? The customers. So we did some qualitative surveys and quantitative surveys in order to know what I call like looking to their user journey and the moments that matter along a user's journey, because there's a circumstance for this person when they decide to take up a product. And this is true whether it's B2B or B2C. So something has changed in their world where they're looking for something. The pain point is high enough, they want to save time, they want to save money, they want to look good. What is that thing? And they have different circumstances along the way. And so when we asked these questions to validate what we thought about the user journey, and then what did they feel about it? If they had 3 words to say what that experience was like for them, what would that be? And guess what? We got all of this data that then we could wrap together and give back to them as part of the brand. So that when you can say something better than they can say it themselves, then that is a helpful way to show the market that you're with them and you understand them, and then you can expand from there. So I know it's not like it's one of those, it's simple but not easy, is like we have to go ask folks, and I've done a lot of this work over many, many years, and I think I'm pretty good at coming up with the questions, but it always happens this way when I start my qualitative research and user research, that I write my questions, I think I do a good job, and then 3 interviews in, I change my questions. Because I think it's a very reasonable and humble thing to say, is that like, I don't even have the answers, I don't have the questions. And also, I'm gonna double down on this, particularly if you're working with a community that you don't have the lived experience of. So make sure you're partnering with folks with local context for those users. We say in social justice, and it's same in user design, nothing about us without us.
I mean, I think this example of lived experience happens often in the region, right? You have Western founders who think that their technology or their experience will be able to localize here with no context to the actual experience of customers, mothers, B2B managers, innovation managers. And there's a lack of translation and context that's lost in trying to bring their markets from Europe, Germany, Canada, to the UAE, to LATAM, to Africa. So part of the user experience and user pain is to understand what it means to have a local context in that problem. And what we're talking about may seem like a bit fluffy at times, especially for those who are technical founders, but this is driven by deep research into how the brain functions and how the brain takes on stories. Who here knows Pixar movies and Disney? What's a favorite Pixar movie from you guys? I love Toy Story personally.
I like Inside Out.
Inside Out's an interesting one. Anything else? Any other memories of storytelling? Right, these things stick to us even as adults because they activate certain parts of the chemical mind when it comes to tension of a storytelling with an eventual triumph of that narrative, right? So you have the cortisol that triggers the attention of the brain. You have endorphins and oxytocin that brings together the actual solution and pain point, and then leaves you feeling good. And these are actual chemical reactions that happen that we can consume on a micro level, even subconsciously. I mean, they're one of the founders today in their stories mentioned a point about their friend passing away from cancer and solving a problem through some of their technology. And I heard many pitches today. I didn't pay attention to a few of them, but that story in particular caught my attention because, again, there's a tension in that initial storytelling with a solution and a pain point that they're trying to solve with a world that they want to see envisioned. And that happens to us constantly through Twitter, through branding, through conversations with founders and community members. And this is actually a psychological process that we can repeat and a framework that we can use to tell our stories as companies, right? So don't underestimate the ability to really trigger the mind, to get to the heart, to get to the wallet of customers, employees, and investors. Any thoughts around that?
I just wanted to, when I shared this earlier this morning, but I think it's worth repeating that generally as founders, we want to invest in founders that are obsessed with their customer and obsessed with the problem that they're solving. And they're going to create value and then capture value. That's the whole point of the business. And then we bring them into an accelerator. They move up a stage and where they're pitching for investment. And then they have a new customer. And nobody calls an investor a customer. But for the purposes of this talk and understanding, getting the minds of our audience, when we have our investor customer, they're buying something different. They're not buying the product. The product is the business. So they're buying what I call a customer factory. I put $1 in, $10 or more comes out. So that's the product that I want to buy. And so we have different stakeholders now. We have our users, our end customers, our real customers that we're doing sales with, and then we have our investor customers. And we think about that for every different segment that we have of what's in their mind. And so making that shift between looking for a founder, again, that is like, you're doing this right. Someone, you're onto something, you're getting traction with your end users or early customers, and now we want you to switch. But we want you to keep doing both. And that is the game of folks who are up to change the world, is that you got to do a lot of things at once.
Look, it's easy to fall for the trap of thinking that being supremely over-polished and clear with your message will resonate, and it will for some people. But a lot of the times, authenticity, vulnerability, and the emotional aspect of it will help you get buy-in from investors, customers, and provide you grace as your company comes from product to alpha to an evolved product line. A lot of times, customers will work with you, will give you feedback, will support you, will stick with you through product hiccups, sticking points of the actual development, false timelines, because they're able to connect with you as an individual, as a founder, as a team, because of the mission that you're aligned behind, and not so much that you have a better technology. And in these moments is where you can really begin to garner true ambassadors, champions, and individuals who will support you in a much greater way than any customer can. And this is very true for also localizing your product to the region, right? It's easy to think that what one government wants in another country is local here, but you have to do the homework, especially in a country like Abu Dhabi and the UAE, to understand what individual pain points are and serve them in a way that's contextual and authentic. There's a reason why you're here and not on Zoom calls serving the region, because it takes the individual face-to-face, the subconscious conversations, the context of authentic communication to allow you to really succeed in launching a product in the UAE. And all those who have succeeded in doing that can really understand that it takes an investment of time, it takes coffees, it takes walks, it takes being in the majlis, it takes coming to these events to meet the customers, to meet the partners, to really get the buy-in when it comes to the final decision maker. It's easy to have a beautiful deck, a beautiful video, but it's the additional emotional authenticity that comes with really being a founder that allows you to be advantageous versus other bigger companies that will always have more money, more engineers, and more resources.
Yeah, we talked this morning about the culture map, if any of y'all are familiar with that book from Erin Myers. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. talks about different communication styles and leadership styles and team management styles, work styles across different cultures. So if you're here in the UAE because you're positioning across markets, an incredibly important book to read about where people are coming from in aggregate. Everybody's an individual, but it helps you understand how different people deal with things differently. So for example, when I was building my startup in Texas, we're from the South. We have like a very low context style where we repeat ourselves a lot. We want to make relationships are really important before we get down to business. Now, when I was pitching in Silicon Valley in New York, they're a much more fast-paced culture where transactions is the name of the game. So it's not uncommon for in the first 30 seconds of meeting someone to say, Ramzi, what's your company? What are you raising? What are your terms? Just not that weird. And he would say, I'm raising this. Are you currently deploying capital? What's your process? And we'd very quickly, we're a match, we're not a match. Now, if I tried that in Texas, people would think I was trying to take money out of their pocket. It would be offensive. Conversation over. So just understanding the, again, I feel like a broken record, but that's the whole point, right? The context we're speaking into and taking care to be authentic, but to be effective.
Speaking of books to recommend, I have 3 others that could be helpful to you in your journey. Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Berger is a great book that helps around why brands hang around. Contagious, Why Things Catch On is another great resource. And then lastly is the Pixar Storytelling, which kind of details how Disney and Pixar create this beautiful narrative that allows us to connect with it 10, 20 years later. So this is kind of just bullet points for you to share and keep in mind. But at the moment, we'll open it up for Q&A as questions come up about what we've discussed around the context, around storytelling, around acquiring customers, investors, and employees for your mission and your companies. And feel free to raise your hand. We'll pass you the mic and we'll respond and keep things open and casual. Any questions?
What are the key methods for creating a good story for the startup?
Yeah, so I have a template that I provided for Hub 71 that is, we can get to you or you can reach out and we'll get it over to you, but it's based on, I think, Guy Kawasaki has a really great framework called the only 10 slides you need. And I put an asterisk by 10 because I think that's a little bit flexible, but the point is you want to keep it really tight. And I also say that you get no points off for the amount of slides you have in the appendix. But really like keeping your pitch very tight in a particular format. And it's usually, now we're going to test me, problem, solution, market, team, traction. What else is in there? Product, company formation, in your story, competitors, competitive landscape, yes, go to market, and your ask. So those are kind of the nuts and bolts. And it really is like if we think about a conversation, I'm like, hi, how are you? What are you working on? What brings you here? And you might say, I'm working on this. Why are you working on that? Well, here's my story or here's my problem that I see in the market. And it should feel like a natural conversation where we're sharing what we are working on versus like when we all get pitched at and we're like sold to, we do this as human beings rather than, okay, is this for me? Is this not for me? But I think that the metrics by stage, that can be Googleable, and there was just a really great post on LinkedIn we can send you as well. But the only 10 slides you need, I think, is a really good forcing function for answering those questions in a succinct way. And to be honest, like I just did this for a stealth venture that I'm working on, and it's still hard for me because I say it's hard to cut your own hair well. You know, it's like being the person who's doing it versus like working on somebody else's is always harder.
And that's a great point about feedback and the value of feedback and being authentic and open about this process as you develop the story. It's easy to think that I know what the company needs, I am the problem, I am the founder, but this environment is a perfect one to test your pitch, to test your elevator pitch, to tweak your product pitch. In Techstars, previously we had a thing called Mentor Madness, right? Where you would have 20 to 50 conversations with mentors. And the goal there is not to collect information from the experts, but to really test the feedback about how you position the company. Do you lead with the product, right? Do you lead with the problem? Do you lead with yourself sometimes, right? Because a lot of times we're investing in the individuals and the founders and the team, because the company is still pre-product, it's pre-revenue, it's pre-launch, right? So for me, I don't care so much about what you think is going to happen, but I believe in the individuals who will make it happen, right? So it's a good way of kind of thinking about yourself as an individual in this arc, and not so much as the hero, but as the person building the product. Do you have another question?
Yeah, also, should I present a short demo if it's a digital product, a software of the demo in like 5 minutes pitch, or?
I don't need a demo as an investor. I don't need a demo of your product because the thing that you're demoing is your business. So the demo that your business has credibility is that you have customers or users, or you've done this many customer interviews, people have picked up the phone, you're onto something. So now if I'm a customer, then I might need a demo of your product so that I know how it works in my context. But for an investor, it may not be like the most favorite thing to hear, but some of them don't care so much about what you're building because what you're building of value for them is the company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the communication style of the region. A lot of times if you come into this conversation, this environment over breakfast and you meet somebody, the goal is a second conversation, not a demo conversation. Right, so you have 5 minutes and I want to meet you as an interesting individual building an interesting product that I want to learn more about. Right, so keep it very interpersonal, ask them questions, present yourself in an interesting way, but leave space for that interaction to develop formally versus trying to be very transactional, which can work against you, right? Because people get switched off and they move on to the conversation. But finding a way to be memorable and sync up a second conversation, whether it be a coffee in the corner, a Zoom meeting later on, allows you the chance and the space to follow up with more context, have an email follow-up, right? Kind of create more touch points than beyond the actual networking event itself. Any other questions in the back? Yeah.
I'm just curious, when you have sort of what you were touching on, like something where you're going B2B and you have like a train of people you have to get through to get approval for something, and you have a product that's something like supply chain efficiency or inventory, where it's not like a very purpose-driven thing, how do you guys recommend approaching storytelling in that type of scenario?
Yeah, I think that we want to know what the individual success criteria is for those individuals, because their purpose may not be some lofty social impact goal, but they want to get home and see their family faster. They want to get promoted. They want to not get fired. So it's like, hopefully it's not as dramatic as not get fired, but people want to look good. They want to save time. They want to increase money. It's really simple for folks. So like, what are those things that in their context is going to help them do their jobs better? And hopefully they have a pain point along the way, or we need to figure out how to tell that story that like legal says I'm worth getting this paperwork off my desk because I know that Ramzi, my colleague over in sales, says this is a great idea for him and he has the social capital as a champion to bring this to me. So you also need internal champions.
It goes back to thinking about who the end user is and who the end buyer is, right? There's somebody who approves that budget, there's somebody who actually uses that tool. Kind of having that context, switching between back and forth and getting in between the two is kind of how to think about that. But that's a good framework to view it at.
I have a sort of add-on question to this, again, in terms of B2B engagement. Certainly there are different stakeholders for different priorities, but you mentioned earlier there's also emotional connect dimension, right? And when you're going through that sort of chain of multiple stakeholders, sometimes that gets lost. How do you, focus on that or try to establish that when you're dealing with multiple stakeholders who all are relevant to this, buying process or just giving buy-in? How do you get your arms around that?
I think that there's a lot. We could do a whole presentation on B2B sales, and one of them is having this internal champion. So the person that generally it's identifying your personas, no matter what you're selling or where you're selling. And the B2B champion persona, particularly for startups, they have been in the company long enough to know where all the informal levers are pulled, because generally as a startup, you're not going to measure up to typical procurement practices. So they're going to have to figure out how to get through that maze. They already know it. They have a lot of social capital, so they just came off of a big win. And so they're able to shepherd this through the company with their social capital. And then if you have materials and sales decks, it's common to be like, if you're in HR, these are the things you need to know. If you're in legal, these are the things you need to know. If you're an engineer, these are the things to know. So you're proactively answering these objections before it's landing on someone's desk. And those are more functional, technical things, but because I do think you'll lose some of this emotion along the way, but not everybody needs that emotion and vision, or they're getting it from their colleague that's like, come on, Ramzi, like, we got to do this, it's going to be amazing. And we've already laid out these things to make it easy for you. I think making things easy for people is a huge metric of success that's undersold.
Also, a good reminder is that every conversation you have down the supply chain becomes a vendor conversation, and then you're put against other vendors, right? So then you become part of the different conversations with Accenture, with other company providers, whatever it may be. Having a reminder of who you are and why you're here in this conversation is always helpful. Whether it be in your deck, in your one-pager, in the intro of your email, in your intro of your conversation, remind them who you are, why you're credible, and what you look to do in the world, right? Kind of reminds them of who this individual is, reframes the conversation, and then you can get to the actual product specs, integration, deployment, and connection and partnership as well.
That's really important, that we're always starting at the last place we left off, and we might have to re-presence our sales. Like, stop selling if you've already sold, but if you've lost someone and you need to come back, then you have to start again.
That helps.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shahbaz. I'm an investment analyst. Okay, so in the recent past, we had many stories like Theranos, FTX, and so many other companies who had great story, but they got lost in their vision. Okay, so what advice do you have for startups, to not to get disillusioned by their mission? And on the other hand, for investors, what are the red flags that you would point out, to be careful with their investments?
Good question.
I mean, credibility is everything, right? And so there was a lack of due diligence paid with Theranos on many, many different levels. I mean, there was blatant fraud and lying, and then there was a lack of due diligence in taking someone's word for it, the next one, the next one, the next one. And then there was like a internal culture of fear to where people couldn't step up and say, the science is not backing this up. So there is this like fake it till you make it in startups, which I'm not a fan of. And I don't think it works for all founders. Certain founders it works more than others. And so as a woman in tech, for some people of color, I think it's incredibly important that we are walking this line of being confident about our models. And these what the models say, and here's all the math that went into this model. Knowing that we can't know everything in a startup. I mean, we can't know everything in life. We're like obsessed with trying to control everything that's going to happen, and that's the business that we're in. But knowing that these are the things that we're going to learn over time. And I think it's an incredibly important when you're talking about relationships that investors generally don't invest in dots, they invest in lines. So I'm going to meet you over time, and I'm going to say, look for credibility that you said that you said you were going to do something and you did it. And then you did it again, or you said, I didn't do it because we learned something else. And they have that transparency, and you're building the relationship over time because you're going to be together for 8-10 years. So that is important. I think that I look for specifics and also like a bottoms-up analysis when someone says, it's a $42 billion market, and if we just get 1% of that, we'll all be rich. Like, for me, that's a red flag that someone is early in their journey. I'm not going to say they're full of, you know what? I'm going to say they're early in their journey, and I would encourage them to say, like, it's a $42 billion market. We think we can get this much in this way because we know that this is about our customer, and they're doing these things, and we're going after that first, and then we'll go to this next sector. And they can be wrong, but they're showing me their logic set. I sort of joke that I want to know that there's an adult in the room throwing the dart. I can like see the math that went into it, and we can say, okay, but if you just tweak this or tweak that, then that I can work with in a way that, like, we're going to be wrong. And investors are putting together a portfolio because early stage investing is risky. But we want to de-risk as much as possible, and there's multiple ways. It's like team, execution, idea, technology, all of these things that we're de-risking. So I think it's on both sides to know that we're in a game that's early stage and risky, and do our best with integrity to show the math and our logic set of how we got to our decisions.
Yeah, I think my points there, and there's great points by Laurie, is from the investment side and both by the customer side is be driven by the customer experience, right? Credibility can be a false signal, as proven by Theranos, right, with their board of directors and their investors, and you kind of have this pylon dynamic of investors, which also happens in the region here as well, right? You'll have VCs say no, no, no until somebody says yes, and the rest of them will come back and say yes. I think there lacks an early conviction process in investing in the region, but testing the experience and the knowledge of the pain point of the users, of the customers, even if they're not customers yet, understanding what they know about that journey, how far they've gone into that process to understand it. Have they gone to the manufacturing floor? Have they talked to 50 plus customers? Do they have some analytics around the number of customers they've spoken to? These are points to understand that they are in the weeds with the right people and not at investor sessions and investor conferences with the wrong people at the early stages, on both sides, from the founder perspective and the investment perspective as well.
I'll just double down on that too from the founder side, that we can get, people can get distracted by these vanity metrics. We have this many impressions on our social media. Well, that doesn't tell me you have any engagement metrics. Or we have these fancy people on our board. Okay, but like, are they actually invested in the business? What are they doing for your business? There's this famous story, and now I'm going to forget the whole story, but what I remember from it, storytelling, is does this sell more flowers? It was the 1-800-Flowers guy who built a huge business, and what he would say is, does this sell more flowers? Like, that's the business he's in, versus like all these other shiny things that we could be doing. How does this move the needle on our KPIs? And being super data driven on that. And it's hard because we're, Steve Blank says that a startup is a temporary organization in search of a business model. So knowing that we're like out there and we have hypothesis and we're testing and we're going to fail sometimes and we're going to succeed, and what is the riskiest part of a business, that then we can shore that up, and if we're right, we should move forward. If we're wrong, we should stop, and we're going to keep doing that until the end of the business.
Thank you both for your insights. And so my question mainly pertains to how you can better tailor the story. So for some context, I recently started an internship position at an investment company where I'm in a business development / client outreach position. So I just wanted to know how I can better, instead of being in the storytelling position of me being like the founder or co-founder of a company, how I can better tell more insights or information about, the investment company that I'm working at, kind of how we started, and kind of more informing like the potential clients on it. And then kind of like a follow-up question is, how would I be able to communicate with them to kind of eliminate that like fluff, like what you were saying with, being in Texas and kind of starting off with that, hi, how are you? And like having that conversation route versus the East and West Coast where you just want to get right into business and the question answering.
This comes back to your ideal customer and like knowing who you are and what your brand is. And if you're a new company, new investment firm, you might have some assumptions about what your market's like, and you have to go validate that before you find like, oh, this is our customer. I serve 0 to 1, sometimes 0 to 3 stage, and that can be inside of a corporation, but they're doing this little skunkworks project. But I'm not servicing giant companies on things that already exist. I know that about myself and my brand and what I do. So like, what is it that you do and you feel like your firm does well and your ideal customer for that? And then like ask them. So you've taken this meeting. What has you spend your time with us today? What are you looking for? And I don't mean to be flip at all, but the answers are out here with the customers. So we have to ask them, or like observe. Observation is a valid research technique of what they are doing. Because people will, what does it say? I don't believe what you say because I see what you do. right? So we want to look for what are people doing? If we're a fly on the wall, what are they doing? Where are they spending their money? Are they wanting you to put it somewhere else? Like, why would they be coming to you? So really detailing the circumstances in which they're coming to you and what they care about. I'll give you an example. I have a colleague who works at UBS, largest wealth manager in the world, and she runs a program for women's wealth. So you may know that the great wealth transfer is happening across the world. Trillions of dollars are coming into women's hands, and UBS doesn't want to be flat-footed in creating a product. So she, like, what do women want who are wealth holders? And they use words like freedom and security rather than growth, which is what men use. And they might be doing the same kinds of activities, but how you sell into this customer is different. And they've come up with the nuance, and this is like back to the key analogy. They've shaved off the millimeter to understanding and having the data prove that their customer base is not risk averse, they're risk aware. So they're asking these kinds of questions that show the nuance of this customer base. And once you're that crisp with your customer, by asking them and say, I want to have 10 interviews, and you don't have to say, hello, I would like to interview you. You would say, great, what brings you here today? What are you interested in? We have these kinds of products. Are any of these of interest to you? Why or why not? Then you're getting this information in a conversation where you're building a relationship. And again, with your ideal customers, are they locally in this region? What's their communication style? Or they're here because they're from New York, and you're going to have to adjust to what they're looking for. And again, these are assumptions. They might be from New York, but culturally here, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like I just gave you one of these it depends answers, but I would like to provide all of us with the framework to apply to our situations. Like, I don't have the answer either, because it's out there with your customers that you have to go discover.
Okay. If I was in your position, those are great answers to think about. If I was in your position, I would treat the founders and the leadership as your customers for the first couple days, right? Ask them about their experience, ask them about what they do to help founders, ask them how they got to this point. So you have a bit of context and a story to develop in your own way. And then I would go back to your portfolio companies that you've already invested in, right? The past few that you've already invested in and helped out, and ask them, what is it about us that you enjoyed, or what have we done for you, so you understand some of the context. So then you can be your own founder in this experience, right? Yes, you're an intern. Yes, you're quite young, but it doesn't mean you can't communicate like a founder of that investment group, right? And that portrays confidence, that portrays due diligence and research internally that'll be projected onto the future companies, and they understand that you're coming in with a wealth of knowledge, but with a lot of energy and vigor as well, being a youthful intern. So that's a good way to approach it, and best of luck to you in your process.
I also think it's just great deal qualification skills all around to say, like, what are you interested in, what your pain points are, what is your budget, and we may soften this language or have a questionnaire. There's different mediums to be able to do this. One very extreme case, I remember there's an ad agency that their homepage says, our minimum clients spend $500,000 with us. If that's you, click here. If it's not, have a great day. Like, not my style, but they were clear, and the people who click to come on in, they're already qualified, and they appreciate this bold approach. They could be direct, da-da-da-da-da. Again, not my style, but an extreme example of, like, who's for us and who's not for us as a customer.
Any last questions? Cool. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being here. Thanks to Laurie and Hub 71 for hosting us. And we'll see you around the community, and best of luck in your building journeys.